All right, today we're going to be looking at John chapter 8. We're going to be reading verses 1 through 11. And there we read, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. But what do you say?' This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger, as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, 'He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first.' And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, 'Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you?' She said, 'No one, Lord.' And Jesus said to her, 'Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more.'" This is the story of the woman caught in adultery, and it's a beautiful story of God's grace and God's forgiveness and God's gentleness. Man, I love the way that God handles us with gentleness. I love the way that Jesus handles this woman with gentleness. And God is the Holy One, the one that is infinitely holy, complete and utter hatred for anything immoral. That's what holiness is. Infinite holiness means infinite hate on sin. So much so that when the world was covered in sin in the days of Noah, he flooded the world. He hates sin. So much so that when Achan took something from the spoils of Jericho that belonged to God, Achan was stoned. His family, even his cattle was stoned and even set on fire, just as a lesson to Israel and as a picture of how much God hates sin. The reality of hell, that God would take a sinner who is offensive to God and put him in hell for all eternity. That's God's holiness. That's how much God hates sin. And yet, even though we have this sin, even though we have this guilt of death on our shoulders, and even this woman that was caught in the act of adultery had so much sin, man, he handles us with such gentleness and such grace. It's just so hard not to fall in love with Jesus. One thing I love about the story is trying to look at it from the perspective of the woman that was caught in adultery. In verse 4 it says, "The Pharisees said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act.'" So imagine this scene. Here's a woman who lives in Israel. Israel is the moral authority of the area of the Pharisees, and this woman is in rebellion against God, and in rebellion against the Pharisees, and rebellion against the law of the land, the customs, and the culture of the land. And she's with this man, whether she's married or whether he's married, we don't know, but it's adultery, and they know. This isn't something that they're ignorant of. This isn't a sin that they didn't know about. They know that this is sin. So she's in this act of adultery, and the Pharisees catch her. Excuse me. Excuse me. The Pharisees catch her in this act, and she has to be so embarrassed. She knows that the Pharisees are the righteous rulers. She would know just instantly, as soon as the Pharisees saw her, all this shame, all this guilt that she would have, so much embarrassment. And the Pharisees take her, and the Pharisees say, "We are going to go see Jesus." Now, the Pharisees were here righteously, and their reputation for being the moral authority in the land was here. Jesus was higher. Jesus would have been famous in the area. He would have been known for being the guy that is healing people, for being the guy that's raising people from the dead. He is teaching on moral things. He's teaching on the heart. He is the moral authority. So this woman caught in adultery, being dragged out by the Pharisees, these moral authorities, being brought to see Jesus before, uh, before, which is even higher moral authority, is on her way out. And what you have to understand about this time, in verse 1 and 2, says, early in the morning, he came to the temple, and that was his custom, that he sat down and taught people. So Jesus, it's early in the morning. Jesus is sitting at the temple. There's all these people there listening to Jesus teach, and this is what Jesus did every morning. Man, imagine being able to, instead of do devotions every morning, imagine being able to go to the temple and listen to Jesus himself talk. Man, what a beautiful privilege that would be. And so she's being dragged out to this area, and she sees Jesus, and she sees the crowd that he's teaching. And man, she knows why she's there. She's facing death. She's facing the sentence of being bludgeoned to death with rocks, being stoned. And the fear that I'm sure is permeating in her heart. Man, she's going to die. She's going to die a shameful death. She's going to die because she's a sinner. She's going to die because she did something very, very wrong, very offensive. And man, the shame that this woman would have felt, being caught in adultery, knowing that you're about to die because of this. The shame. And so the Pharisees start getting everyone ready to stone her. They start getting rocks. They start handing out rocks. And they're ready to kill this woman. And they tell Jesus what's going on, and they're trying to trick Jesus, because if he said no, that she shouldn't be stoned, he's denying the Old Testament law, and she's saying she should be stoned, he would lose favor with the people that was before him. So they're trying to trick him. They're trying to put him in between a rock and a hard place. And then the gentleness of God enters in. He says, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And he starts writing on the ground. We don't know what he was writing. He might have been writing the sins of the Pharisees, something that they have their own shame about. He might have been writing something else. The scripture doesn't say. But the point is, whatever he wrote convicted the hearts, and people started to leave. Jesus has absolute, complete moral right to stone the woman himself. He is without sin, throw the first stone. He is without sin. Jesus Christ is without sin. And he hates sin. He is perfectly holy. Everything that God is, Jesus is. He is perfectly holy and hates sin, and had every right to kill this woman and send her soul to hell for all eternity, and he would have been perfectly just in doing so. But he doesn't. He says, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She says, no one. And he says in his gentleness, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Man, all the guilt, all the shame, all the embarrassment, all the fear of death. Jesus saved me from the punishment of my sin. Jesus saved me from death. Jesus saved me. Would have been in this woman's heart. Man, I sinned so bad. I sinned against God even this morning. I do things that I know I shouldn't do. I take the grace of God for granted. I take advantage of it. I'm a sinner. Jesus saved me from the guilt, from the punishment of my sin. Praise Him. What a wonderful act of the gentleness of God. I love the way Jesus handles us. Man, we need to handle people gently. We need to handle people with grace. We need to handle people with, even when we have the right to be mad at someone, even when we have the right to, someone wronged us and we can get in their face and yell at them about it, we need to handle them with gentleness, just like Jesus handles us. And we need to do everything we can to be the epitome of a holy and righteous people, because that's who we've been called to be, and that's what Jesus died to make us be. Paris Reed had said, may the Lamb who was slain have the reward for his suffering, and his reward is our holiness and our peace. Thanks for watching.